Thank you for your patience. So we're going to, first of all, I have papers for you. We're going to take a look at the writing first. For some of you, what I'm going to say today is going to be really, I know all this. I've done this a million times. For some of you, you're going to say, I've never done this before. Please explain it to me. But I want you to hold on to the papers you wrote. I am not actually going to take them from you because we're going to do something with them. I decided based on what I read from your papers that I'm giving back to you. Ellen, Ella, Brett, Jesse, Matthew. Matthew, I don't recognize him because he has a hood on. Okay. Is this yours? Is this okay? I tried to give it to somebody yesterday, but no one would take it. Okay. So some of you, I put some comments this time. Those of you, if you're a better writer, I might be harder on you. I know that seems really unfair, but it's not. You need to support what you say. Oh, but one of you, I said, ask me about this comma. Who was it? It's on the top. It's in the first paragraph, and I changed a comma, and I said, ask me about this comma. Is it you? Okay. Do you mind if I out you on this particular sentence? Okay. Okay. So you guys have been told, and it's a good thing you've been told, that whenever, are you guys with me? That when you use a who or which clause, you separate it out with commas, right? Okay. So the man, comma, who was walking down the street, comma, got eaten by a velociraptor. All right. And so the who in that case, I can take it out of the sentence. Do you hear? The man got eaten by a velociraptor. Do you see the who was walking down the street? That's not really important. Guys, are you with me? Like the look of shame. Stop. Sometimes the who can't be removed. Listen to Jesse's sentence. No, anybody could do this. Anybody, it just happens to be Jesse. I'm sorry. Listen to this sentence. Shh, guys, be quiet. We are fighting not only this blasted room, but now the wind is making something bang upstairs. You know, can you hear it? So we have to nip the shenanigans. Okay. Aeneas was a man who was pursued in malice by the goddess Juno and fled to Troy due to the unexpected turn of events that led to the downfall of Troy. Yes, okay. No, I'm sorry. Should there have been an end mark there? No, okay. Aeneas was a man who was pursued in malice by the goddess Juno and fled to Troy. I'm going to stop there because the rest of it isn't important. If I take that out, Aeneas was a man. Oh, Aeneas was a man. Thank you for informing me that Aeneas, that doesn't make any sense anymore if I take the who away. This is called a restrictive. This is a restrictive adjectival clause. It's restrictive and it means that it has to be there. So listen to the difference between these. The man who was walking down the street got eaten by a velociraptor, okay? The man who stole my purse got eaten by a velociraptor. In the first case, do you see how I'm just giving you additional information about the man? But in the second case, I'm telling you it was this man, the man who stole my purse. And I'm so glad he got eaten by a velociraptor. Do you see the who stole my purse? That restricts what man it can be. Does this even remotely make sense? Do you hear what I'm saying? Do you hear the difference between them? So when I say, you know, the pizza which was delicious is gone. All right, which was delicious, this is not important. The pizza slice which I dropped on the floor is sitting over on that napkin. You see, you want to know which one I dropped on the floor. I know you do, because you don't want to eat that one. That's a particular piece. That's restrictive. But if I say the pizza which was delicious, just sort of giving you general information. So Jesse, back to Jesse, your comma. When it's restrictive, you don't put a comma. The man who stole my purse. got eaten by a velociraptor. I don't need a comma. This is kind of the advanced level of the whole put a comma around your who which. But if that who which is vital information, it's not just added touch. It's vital. You're restricting. It's the pizza slice which I dropped on the floor. It is the man who stole my purse. You don't need a comma. So in your case, Jesse, and this is very picky grammatical sounding thing, you don't need a comma when you do that. Does anybody else have a question about anything I did on your paper? Yes. Yes. Explain to me.
When when Jesus was killed and then rose again, I was trying to do opposites.
Oh, okay.
Not really.
Well, it's just. No, yeah, well, I mean, that sounds like just a chain of events. He died and rose again. I realize, but if you played it up like this, let's see if we can make it better. On the one hand, Jesus died and his disciples thought everything was over. But to their surprise, he rose again. Do you see? And now I realize I've said the same thing, but I've set them against each other. But when you just say he died and rose again, it just sounds to me like a chain of events that happened. Does that make sense? But thank you for pointing it out to me. Anything else that you guys want to mention, ask? Even if I crossed out a comma, I don't always explain why I crossed out the comma. So look at those. Commas are important. All right. If not, here's what I want to do. You guys, pretty much everybody has got the idea. I think for some people, I made some suggestions on how you could do it better. But I feel like you're ready for us to just add an introduction and a conclusion to the paper you have there. Was Aeneas a good leader? So don't give it to me. Yeah, I know. Okay. Let me start over again, Rat. You thought you were bringing me a paper today. Was Aeneas a good leader? And the next paper we started, I was going to add something to it, but I decided to add it to this paper. So now your paper isn't actually done anymore. Now, this completely doesn't matter to you if you typed it on a computer, because you can just insert. If you handwrite them, it will require handwriting again. But this is okay, because you know what? Sometimes when we copy things out, we find mistakes that we made. It won't do us any harm. But we are going to add an introduction and a conclusion to, was Aeneas a good leader? The paper you are not going to give me, but you thought you were. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Well, see, that's the problem. Some of you did more than the assignment in the paper that I gave back to you. Some of you did an introduction. However, you included it in the first paragraph. Introductions aren't part of your first paragraph. Introductions are the first paragraph, and then the body is separate. So we're going to separate those. This is why I said earlier, some of you already know how to do exactly what I'm going to tell you to do. Some of you don't. So I am going to treat all of you as if you've never done this before. So be patient if you say, this is old stuff, Mrs. Ferguson, I know all this. But a few of you put an introduction. You put, hey guys, please. You put the things that you include in an introduction, but you put them in the first body paragraph. We need to pull those out. An introduction is a separate thing, okay? Okay, so I need you to either, on the paper that you are about to give me, on the back if you have room, or any blank piece of paper you have, it can be in your reading guide, wherever, I need you to write down what we're going to write on the board together. You, over break, wrote for me. Three paragraphs. Was Aeneas a good leader? And in paragraph 1, you gave me reason 1 why he was or was not, and then you supported it with at least 3 reasons. And then you gave me another reason why he was or was not, and you supported it with at least 3 reasons. Then you gave me another third reason why he was or was not, and you supported it with 3 reasons. Does this all seem very familiar? Is this a paper that you have in your possession currently? Okay, good.
I did.
Well, you might, oh, okay. Well, then see, then maybe your job is done.
Yeah, so you already did 2 to 5? Yeah, I swear you said 5 on that introduction.
No, I did not. Did anybody else write more than, Shh, guys, be quiet, please. Did anyone else write more than 3 paragraphs? At the back too? No, because that wasn't the assignment. It's totally fine. You went, as they say in Redwall, A and B, the C of D, above and beyond the call of duty. A and B, the C of D, above and beyond the call of duty. You know, above and beyond the call of duty, it's the same. So that means this maybe doesn't apply to you, although listen to what I have to say because maybe you need to tweak what you've done, okay? Okay, so hold it, you two, okay. Everybody else, let's go back to my question. Everybody has a paper that looks like this, right? You have 3 paragraphs. Was Aeneas a good leader? And you've chosen a side, and you've supported it. Nod, if you're conscious. Yes, okay, yes. Dalton. Yes, that's okay. See, now, well, you did because it was 2 weeks. Do you see what I mean? No, totally fine. See, there is redemption now because we're not turning it in today. It's your lucky day. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? Okay. Yes. Okay, that's fine. It needed to include a simile, alliteration, an ing opener, and antithesis. If the paper you are getting ready to turn into me does not have all 4 of those, and if they are not marked clearly on your paper, then you already need to have more work to do on your paper. So it's good that you're not turning it in today. Yes.
I actually use the highlighting edit so you can.
That's fine. Do you know what? It doesn't really matter to me, although it would be nicer if you did it the way I asked you. I know that sounds mean, but if you just highlight it or italicize it and you don't write it in the margin, now I got to figure out which one you think it is. Do you see what I mean? This is why I asked you. In the margin, all I'm asking you to do is grab a pencil. It's so much easier to grab a pencil and just put an S or an ALL in the margin than it is to turn on the highlighter or the italicizer or whatever. It's so much easier. And then I know what it is. Okay. We are going to add an introduction and conclusion. I feel like this has been a very jumbled introduction to all this because we've had lots of. Calm down. What? Less. I don't know that they're going wrong so much as interruptions. Okay. Do you notice that I labeled these paragraphs 2, 3, and 4? The reason we put, and like I said, for some of you, you've done this, it's old, but bear with me. The reason we put an introduction in front of a paper is because, okay, I need your paper from last week that you didn't do an introduction. But you did, you did. Okay. You know what, Matthew, you did a little bit of introduction too. That's why you're ready to do this, obviously. Okay, we're stealing Owen's paper now. All right, Aeneas should have left Dido because the gods told him to. This is the way his paper begins. Now, you guys instinctively knew, the ones of you who put introductory remarks, that's very abrupt. It's exactly what I asked you to do, Owen. But do you see how when a paper just starts, Aeneas is a good leader. Like, who is Aeneas and why are we talking about him? I need something to introduce me. I need something to draw me in, right? Because it's just a very abrupt start. And that's what an introduction does. And so Rhett, okay, this is the should have left Dido. He started, if God tells you to do something, would you directly disobey? You see, he's easing me in. I hope the answer is no. Okay. So what we're going to add this week is an introduction and a conclusion. Okay? So you're going to take the paper that you have ready to give me. Now, Rhett's already done it. It's fine. That's because he did it last year with me. He knows what I'm going to say. Just he knows already what I'm going to say. They're mind readers. But you're going to take the paper home and you're going to bring me a new one. But you've already written this part. Do you see what I'm saying? The hard part is done. Thinking of support, thinking of reasons. We're going to talk about what we put in an introduction and conclusion. Now, can I erase all of this? Are we good? This is what your paper is going to look like. So let's talk about an introduction. I want you to write this information down, okay? I want you to have it. If you know it and you have it all memorized, I suppose you don't have to write it down. Okay. What does an introduction do? Tell me something an introduction does. Go for it. No, you do it.
It starts the paper.
Okay.
Without, like,
It does. Specifically, what's something I can do to start my paper, Dalton? Okay, one thing that I need to do is state the question. In this case, was Aeneas a good leader? I need to give my position, yes or no, and I need to state my 3 supports. Somewhere in your introduction, you need to say that we are talking about whether or not Aeneas is a good leader. And you need to let me know whether you're saying yes, he is, or no, he isn't. And then you need to just run through those 3 main points that you're going to make. When you read about Aeneas, you might wonder if he's a good leader. I think he is a good leader because he took care of his men, obeyed the gods, and I can't think of a third right now, all right? But I'd list my 3 points. I do not think Aeneas was a good leader at all because he left behind people, he let his wife get killed. I don't know, that's too small a reason. Okay, I'm having trouble. Yeah, no one defended that side. But does that make sense, what Dalton said? Somewhere in my introduction, I need to say, what question am I answering in this paper? What is my position on it? And what is going to be my main supports? Okay, what else should be in an introduction, Jesse? Okay, so I want to grab their attention. You know, if I'm going through a newspaper, or magazine, something like that, and I read the first couple of sentences and they're just really super boring, I'm not reading that article. I am not going to read that article. I'm just going to move on, right? You know it. Sometimes, have you ever been turned off by the beginning of a book? You know, like the beginning of the book, this isn't quite the same, but sometimes the beginning of something, it just turns you off. You're not engaged in this in any way, and you say, I'm not going to keep reading this. Well, you don't want someone to stop reading your paper. You worked hard to write that paper. So something to catch the reader's attention. And usually this is good to do towards the beginning. What are some ways to catch a reader's attention? You guys know because you use them. Matthias. A question, an exclamation, a command, perhaps. I'm going to give you examples of all these. A quote, a very short story. We call that an anecdote. Yes. Okay. That's going to be. I was going to write BS. No. Okay. We're not going to write that on the board. Let's hold on to that a minute. Let's talk about. Matthias gave us a ton here. Catch the reader's attention with a question. How would you feel if your home were destroyed and the survivors were looking to you for leadership and comfort? And so instantly, I hear the question. I read the question and I think, oh my goodness, that would be terrible. I can imagine what that would be like. And I'm engaged already. It's engaged my imagination. A command is very much like that. Imagine the gods called you to go to a faraway place and bring your friends with you. Now you stop. Yes, I can imagine that. A quote. A quote can be a little more difficult because you can't just use any quote. Don't just randomly pick a quote from anything. It needs to make sense for your paper. Guys, I need you to stop talking, okay? Unless you really have something, because I'm going to be worn out in 3 hours, my voice, okay? You have to have a quote about the subject that you're talking about. I can hear the whispers. Everything echoes in this room, okay? I really mean it. I need you to respect me and just stop talking for a little while. You guys can talk as much as, and I'm going to ask you questions. We're going to talk about for the temple and Carthage and everything, and you can fire away, okay? But right now, I need you to. Okay. Again, the quote needs to be something that has to do with the subject. In this case, it would have to be about being a good leader, being a good person. Where do you find these quotes? You could quote the Bible. You could quote the Aeneid. You could quote the book that we just read, something that says that Aeneas is a good leader or gives an example of his leadership. But that's harder to do because, I can just make up a command or a question, but I got to look up a quote. Do you see? It's harder to do. So often I think we do that when we just kind of randomly think of one. I suddenly, that's a quote I know, or I know where to find it, and that would be great here. Usually it's harder. What were you going to say, Rhett? No, it can't be. My grandpa always says, don't quote your grandpa. I'm sure your grandpa's great, but don't quote him. Although my grandpa used to say well, the grandpas do that, don't they? Say little quips. My grandpa always said, you have to suffer to have fun. This was in relationship to fishing in general, but you have to suffer to have it. But you hunt, Matthias, right? You have to suffer a little bit to have fun out there. This is my grandpa's motto. Yes. Well, no, he's not. No, that's not that direct. Okay. A short story means really short, like a couple of sentences. For example, and I can't think of a specific example, if there were an Aesop's fable about being a leader, do you see? That'd be perfect. So if your paper were about laziness, you could just in 2 or 3 sentences tell me about the grasshopper and the ant. Do you see? This is also harder though, unless you just know one. You just happen to know a story that would work well. Probably most of the time you're going to grab people with a question or a command. Give me your papers again, Rhett. I don't know. Okay, this is the one you were going to. Yeah, so this is the one. Yeah, this is the one I gave him back. This is the should Aeneas have left. If God tells you to do something, would you directly disobey? I already read that. You see, he opened with a question. And now, thank you. And immediately I am thinking about myself. Would I disobey? Would I do it? What if he asked me to do something hard? Would I do it? And now I'm engaged. Okay. Ooh, see, the Jonah story would be really good, except you have to edit it severely to make it work. Okay, but that would be more about obeying God, not about being a leader. But okay. Matthias also said a backstory. This is what the reader needs to know to understand, your paper, to understand what in the heck you're talking about. Because if I don't know who Aeneas is or anything that happened to him, your paper is meaningless to me. Does that make sense? So I need to briefly, so briefly, tell you what you need to know. In my opinion, here's what you need to know for your paper. I think you need to know that Aeneas fled from Troy, that he was founding a new city in Italy, and that there's a poem called the Aeneid about all of this. Do you need to know that his wife died in Troy? Do you need to know about the funeral games? No, you do not. You do Nisus and Euryalus slipping in the bloody. No, you do not need to know any of that to understand. You really just need to know, okay, Nisus guy running away from Troy, heading to Italy with the survivors. And we learn about his story from a poem called the Aeneid. That'll do it. Now, let's put all of these. I did this because usually they come in a particular order, although they do not have to. Usually we start with our attention getter. How would you feel? I already used this. How would you feel if you left your burning home and your dead wife, yeah, and headed to an unknown land with a group of people all looking to you for support and comfort? Okay. Then I need to tell you the backstory. This very thing happened to Aeneas. He was a survivor of the fall of Troy, and the other survivors gathered around him, and the gods told him to travel to an unknown land, which happened to be Italy, where he was going to found a new civilization. That was a very long sentence, but we hear his story in the amazing epic poem, the Aeneid. Then I need to state my question. Aeneas had many people looking up to him. I'm going to use another one of those questions. Aeneas had many people looking up to him, but was he a good leader? By the way, do you know what we call those questions that we ask that we don't expect anyone to actually answer in a paper like that? It's a rhetorical question, rhetoric is the art of persuasion. A rhetorical question is put in there not because I want you to answer it, it's because I want to stir you up somehow. I'm persuading you. So when I'm practicing rhetoric, I use a rhetorical question. But we use that in everyday language too, when we're not trying to persuade, just those questions people might ask, and they don't expect you to actually answer, although sometimes people do. So I could put another one here, another rhetorical question. But was he a good leader? Aeneas was an amazing leader. And we see this in three ways. And then I state. Do you see? Does that make sense to everybody? Some of you are like, oh my gosh, I already did it. I know. I know. I hate this room. So here's the thing about writing the main part of your paper first, the body, we call it, the actual meat. It's like your paper's a sandwich, and the introduction and the conclusion are the bread. But unless it's really amazing bread, what you're really interested in is the stuff inside the sandwich, right? Generally. And so that's the meat. What you already read or what you already wrote, that's the meat. That's the good part of the sandwich. Now we're just enclosing it. And you know what? You already wrote it. So you know exactly what you're introducing. Have you ever been asked to write something? What you did on your summer vacation? I don't know. Something like that. And you sit there and you've got your pen and your paper. I have no idea what to say. I don't know how to start. What's the first word going to be? I don't know. Because I don't know what I'm going to say. Right? When you start a paper I've no idea. I don't have an outline. I don't have a clue where I'm going. I'm just going to kind of go with it and let it happen while I write. The ideas will just flow. How do I start? The lovely thing about writing the meat and lettuce and tomato and everything of your sandwich first is I know exactly what I'm going to say. It's very easy to introduce it because I already said it. Does that make sense? So your first thing I want you to do this week, if you haven't already done it, some of you have done it, or maybe read over and see if you have all the elements I need, is write an introduction for Was Aeneas a Good Leader? Are we, everybody got it? Okay. Here's the second thing you're going to do. We're going to do the bottom but. The conclusion. Just like papers, like when I read Owen's paper, which was a fabulous beginning of the body of your paper, but it's an abrupt beginning for the whole paper without an introduction. It happens at the end too. You get to the very, very last sentence and it just stops. It's like putting on the brakes so hard and everybody slams forward in the car. Whoa, that was a very abrupt ending. I need to be eased out of your paper. You know, you drew me in and I was all into whether or not Aeneas was a good leader. Now I need you to gently let me down and come out of it. That's what a conclusion does for us. Conclusion, very easy. It concludes your thought. So one thing, I want you to restate your 3 topics, or your three reasons. I've probably said this in here. I'll probably say it again. They say that we just, as people, not just us in this room, but people in general, just don't pay attention very much to what we read or hear. And that if you want people to remember what you say, you tell them what you're going to tell them. And then you tell them. And then you tell them what you told them. Hear it 3 times, and maybe it will get in. Our introduction tells them what we're going to tell them. Then your paper tells them. Your conclusion tells them what you told them. If you think, is one reason more significant? If you think, most significant, we'll say. If you think one of your 3 reasons just was really amazing, list it last, and then tell me why this one's so amazing, so persuasive. Maybe I think the biggest reason Aeneas is a great leader is of the care he took for his people, where he went hunting for them and all the other stuff we listed. So maybe I say Aeneas was an amazing leader. And we can see this throughout the poem about his adventures. And then I list reason 1, and then I list reason 2, and then I say, but the most compelling reason of all is the amazing care he took of his men. I punch that. I punch the one that's got the most strength because I'm about to lose my reader. My reader's about to put the paper down. What is the last thing I want them to remember when they lay my paper down, right? I want them to remember the most significant thing that was in there. Now, the last thing that we want to do is the hardest thing. And I call it the who cares and why. I believe it's called the amplification, right? Why are you writing this paper and why should we care about this issue? Now, I have had papers, gentlemen, I have had papers where it was Mrs. Ferguson cares because she asked me to write this paper. This is absolutely true. But it would be nice to have something more than that. I am not that important in the grand scheme of things. There's got to be a more important reason than me. So this is where we have to use our imagination a little bit. If you think about it, there are very few things in the world that are completely insignificant. Everything's significant to someone. It's just harder to think of the significance of some minor things. This one's not minor. It's about good leadership. Let me ask you, why would we modern Americans care about what makes a good leader? Matthew. And what do we do with our leaders? I mean, how do we get them? We choose them. We choose them in this country. If we don't explore what makes a good leader, how are we going to choose good leaders? Do you see? And suddenly, this paper that was just about some guy who may or may not have ever existed because Mrs. Ferguson told me to do it, turns into, oh, that's actually significant. I should think about what a good leader looks like because in a few years, you guys are going to be old enough to vote. And I'm going to be an old lady in the home someday, and you're going to be voting in the leaders that are, taking away my Social Security or whatever, I want you to choose good leaders. Does that make sense to you guys? And you can use that one. That's a freebie. But maybe you can think of another reason that we would care about what makes good leaders. Someday, you guys will not be kids anymore. You are on the edge of not being kids anymore already. And you will have your own homes, perhaps, and families. And you will be in the role of a leader there. What makes a good leader? You see? So it takes a little imagination. Some papers are easier than others, but these are the things that we should have in your conclusion. Tell me what the issue was and what your reasons were. Punch the one that you think is most significant. The one you think is just a clincher for your argument. Everybody has to agree with me because this is so obviously the case. And then tell me why we should even be talking about this issue at all. Does that make sense to everybody? Are we good? So what you're going to do is you're going to write an introduction to conclusion, but then I don't want you to bring me 2 papers, with the body and then a paper that says introduction and a paragraph and the conclusion. I want it to just be 1 paper with 5 paragraphs. Does that make sense? And so, Ella, those of you who handwrite, totally fine. Handwriting is actually probably better for your brain than typing it in. But it means a little extra work for you because you have to write it out again in paper form. Are there any questions? I'm sorry I was discombobulated at the beginning of that. Yes. Well, it's happened. Because sometimes if you've never done this sort of thing before, you're just not sure what I'm wanting from you. And I always assume that's because I just didn't explain it clearly enough. If you don't give me what I asked for, it could be because you just ignored me, but it could be because I did not explain it well enough. And that's always the first thing I go to, not that you're lazy. But you might be lazy. Okay. If there are no questions, that's what I want you to do for next week. So it's basically you just have to write 2 paragraphs, and I told you exactly what to put in the paragraphs. It was pretty easy. And then bring me a 5-paragraph paper next week. Go ahead and open your reading questions, and let's talk about the Punic Wars. I need a drink. Where did the Carthaginians originally come from? Who are these people? Matthew. Yes, these are Phoenicians. And it just so happens, I was staring at this map, looking at it, waiting for you guys to come in. I brought this actually to look at when we talk about for the temple, because it's a close-up of Israel. And I'll get this out later. Here's the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea and Jerusalem. Look where Tyre and Sidon are. It's just north of Israel's border. We mentioned that, I think we mentioned Jezebel was a priest of Tyre, priest of Sidon, who married King Ahab, king of Israel. She's a rotter through and through. And her whole she launched a dynasty of rotters that led to ugly deaths. So just north of Israel. And of course, in the Aeneid, we have the story that Dido's, brother killed her husband, and then she went on the run with a bunch of treasure that he buried and ended up in Carthage. I didn't bring my whole big map, but ended up in Carthage. Don't know about that story. I don't know it's not true. I don't know it is true. We do know that Carthage is a Phoenician colony. The Phoenicians went there. And we talked about this before. What are the Phoenicians They've got boatloads of money, okay? The Phoenicians, incredibly rich. What is it they make and sell that makes them so rich?
Literally both loads of money they had a lot of those.
Yes,
They were very constrained.
yes. And they at trading, there's a particular item on the trading menu that they produce and people want it. It's the purple dye, purple cloth. So as you see, they're on the coast, right? The major Phoenician cities are on the coast. And they send divers down and they get these snails, Murex snails. Don't know anything, don't even know if they take them out of the shell before they throw them in the pot. All I know is they throw them in the pot and they just reek to high heaven while you're boiling them. So they say. And the gunk that comes out of them makes the most incredible purple dye. And what makes it incredible? Well, you ever have a shirt that starts fading after you wash it? Do you know what I mean? You know. Okay, bad dye, bad, it's cheap. This stuff lasted and it had the brightest, richest color. But it takes a lot of work. I don't know how many snails you got to get to make a vat of dye or how much cloth you can dye. But start imagining, okay, I've got to collect, 500 snails per vat and I can dye, X yards of cloth in one. It's an expensive process. So it got to the point where the only people who had it or could afford it, they're going to be rich, they're going to be kings. And so it became associated with royalty. The Roman citizens, the senators, had the right to have a purple stripe sewed onto their togas to show their rank and their status. So the Phoenicians were selling this all over the Mediterranean. And so you have to use your imagination a little bit because I just brought my tiny map. So you know what happens this direction, right? Africa keeps going until it gets to the Atlantic Ocean and it turns and goes down, right? And you know what happens here. Keeps going and then Spain is here. And there's just a little opening that goes out into the Atlantic Ocean. We call it the Straits of Gibraltar today. They called it the Pillars of Hercules. Carthage, this was her market, all of this. It was dotted with smaller colonies, Spain, North Africa, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And their attitude was just, don't mess with our place. We sell here. Don't bring your stuff here. We will fight you if you bring your stuff here. This is ours. You people in Italy, if you want to trade over to the east with Greece and the Middle East, that's fine with us. Don't mess with us over here. Does that make sense? Because we are making fat wads of cash over here. We don't want somebody butting in on it. So for a long time, all was well. Rome was very busy conquering Italy. Have you noticed everything we've read about Rome so far? First, they were conquering the towns nearby. It was Veii and Falerii. And then they're fighting the Samnites and in Campania and Etruria. And then the Gauls come and they're fighting the Gauls. They're very busy. But they've been so very busy, they've conquered pretty much all of Italy. And but they haven't really messed with Carthage because they're not really thinking of overseas conquests, right? It's like we just want to control Italy. What brought these two places into conflict? That's the next question I asked you. Yeah. Sicily. What happened in Sicily?
Wasn't it like the guy from the king from Syracuse came down and was like besieging this town that people like these like merchants had taken over, and then they turned it Rome for help, and the Romans knew that if they didn't help them, then they would go to Carthage for help, and Carthage would take over Sicily, and then they try to take over.
Yeah, that was very well said. Exactly. A group of guys from Campania went to Sicily, and they just sort of took over a town. And the king in Syracuse didn't like it. And he started attacking them. Well, the king of Syracuse was kind of a jerk, everyone thought. And so these guys said, well, we're not leaving. we'll call in help. Hey, Rome, you want to help us? Because we are from Italy, you know. And King Syracuse didn't like to say Carthage. You want to help us? And so we bring in the big guns from both sides. Rome doesn't like the idea of Carthage setting up shop in Sicily because Sicily is really, really close to Italy. I realize Carthage is pretty close in the grand scheme of things, but they had a nice thing going. You know, Carthage goes this way, the Romans go this way, and all is well. They're not sailing back and forth, attacking each other. But this is just too close for comfort. You know, I'm not real. My 20th century history, even though I lived through almost half of it, is not the greatest. But my understanding of what happened, something very similar happened to America. There was a lot in the 1950s. There was a lot of worry about communism spreading, and this led us eventually to be fighting in Korea and fighting in Vietnam. But one thing that happened is the Cubans had a revolution and they put in a communist government. Cuba is really close to Florida, right? And so it was one thing when we thought, okay, there's the Soviet Union and China and all those Asian countries, and they're way over there on the other side of the world. But when there were communists in Cuba, it freaked people out. And there was a botched attempt to overthrow that government under John F. Kennedy.
They tried to overthrow the Cuban government.
See, you know more about it than I do, Jesse. Yeah, I think so. Castro died, didn't he?
Yeah.
Didn't he finally, like he was 182 or something like that? I'm like, what? Castro is still alive? What? I think so. What were you going to say, Owen? I don't know. Okay, I don't know anything about Cuba. All I know is Hemingway. Hemingway was in Cuba. This is the limit of my knowledge of Cuba. Yeah. But this is Castro we're talking about? Sure, who doesn't?
Like this intelligence guy from the US went in there because this booth he sits in every single time, the same thing that he orders, the same exact time every single time. So, okay, I'm giving you this pill, put this pill in this milkshake, and they put it in, but it has to stay cold. So it has to stay cold.
Okay.
Put it in the milkshake, so they put it in the freezer, and it froze to the bottom of the freezer, and they took it up and it exploded all over the freezer.
That guy's really lucky. Well, anyway, back to Carthage. I think there's a similar worry in Rome. When the enemy, when the people who are suspect move closer to home, it's a very tense situation. So Rome sent troops, Carthage sent troops, and the first Punic War broke out. Remember, Punis is the Latin word for Phoenician. And since the Carthaginians are Phoenician, they call them the Punic Wars. Now, I asked you, oh yeah, go ahead, Rhett. I doubt it. I don't know, but I doubt it because North Africa was completely overrun by Muslims in the 600s. And so that pretty much changed the demographic makeup, I think, of North Africa a lot. I don't know that there isn't anybody, but that was a long time ago. And I don't, there is no Phoenicia. Are there people with Phoenician blood running in their veins? Probably. Well, it's Lebanon. And again, this all was ruled by Muslim Arabs for many, many years. And so it's really changed things. So that's kind of back. That would be a heavy ancestry project, to trace back to the Phoenicians. I think we could do that. I asked you in that question, the second one, how were the two civilizations different? How were Carthage and Rome different types of places or people? Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's what you said was harsh, but probably very accurate. Dorothy Mills is kind of harsh too. She says, the Carthaginian army consisted almost entirely of mercenaries. What are mercenaries? Jesse. You hire them to fight for you. Because why? Because I don't want to do it. Because it's dangerous. It's unpleasant. I don't want to either, Matthias, but, so in the Great War between Davenport and Bettendorf, when they both, muster their armies, I don't even live in Iowa, so nobody be offended by this story, okay? I've known nothing about Davenport and Bettendorf whatsoever. But we're going to say that Davenport, they come out, all the shopkeepers and everything come out with their, I don't know, I was going to say pitchforks, okay, AK-47, whatever, because they are defending their homes and their families, their Davenportian families. But Bettendorf just decided to hire an army from Dubuque. So they can come down. And so the Dubuquans come down and they're fighting, and the Davenportians are like, we will fight for our wives and families. And the Dubuque army sees you coming with your AK-47s, like, you know what, I'm going home to Dubuque. If I'm dead, I can't spend the money. They can't pay me enough to go march on those Davenportians. I'm out of here. I'm going home. And they get on Highway 61 and they're gone, right? Because mercenaries, if they get killed, they can't enjoy the money you're offering them, and there's no point. Do you see the problem with hiring people? It's hard to pay someone to die on your behalf. I'm going to do that. Yeah, Owen. I don't know. Davenport fights for themselves, Owen. They're tough. Okay. Again, if you live in Bettendorf, please do not be offended. And it's the great Illinois. It's all in Iowa so far. So, yeah, it's she says again rather harshly, like Matthew. The mercenary army was therefore neither very patriotic nor very trustworthy, but Carthage believed that such qualities could be bought like anything else. It says the chief strength of Rome lay in the character of her citizens, a character which was honest, manly, law-abiding, and God-fearing, a character which showed at its best in times of trial and disaster, a character distinguished by rare powers of steadfastness and endurance. The chief strength of Carthage was in her wealth. She oppressed those whom she governed, and her citizens were corrupt, greedy, lacking in discipline, and could only be relied on in the days of success. All right. And then she goes on to say, this war, this series of 3 wars, isn't so much about Carthage and Rome. She says it's about which of the 2 civilizations was to endure. What kind of people is Europe going to be? Do you used to mean who's going to rule Europe someday? Is it the descendants of the Romans and the Romans' ideas, or the descendants of Carthage and Carthage's ideas? Because they're very different. Yeah, what were you going to say, Rhett? I'm sorry. So yes, so the hostilities broke out in Sicily, but I know we're getting, okay, now that sounds like that sounds like music. Earlier there was a bang. I think it was the wind was banging for the. I hate this room so much. I hate this room so much. Okay. Why would anyone need that music so loud? Okay, sorry. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. We'll die on this hill. Doesn't. All music is too loud. And so we need to ruin all the team's hearing. Okay, I'm done. I'll suck my opinion back in. Oh, I hate it. Okay. What was I saying before I went off the rails? Wow. Oh, Okay, so Carthage had made their money, remember how? Trading. How were they traveling around visiting their various trading markets? What are they using? Say it again. Boats. They can't. But so they've been traveling around. Shh. So listen. Where has Rome been fighting for the last hundreds of years? Anywhere they need to go by boat? No. We can just march up and down Italy. We don't need boats. I'm not saying they had no boats whatsoever, and they didn't sometimes sail up the coast. But I am saying they had no navy. They had no large-scale fighting boats because they didn't need them. All their fighting was on land. So I blew my next question out. What do the Romans need to successfully fight Carthage? Boats. Go ahead, Rhett, before you forget.
That's what I was going to say. Another reason they don't want Carthage right there is land. Depending on the mountains and like Alps and stuff, but like Italy is mostly flat except in the middle. Anywhere else except like big mountains, it's fairly easy to walk. Boats you can kind of anticipate. You'd be like, oh, I can see them coming, and they like.
That's true.
And so if Carthage has to sail the road where they are now. If they get to Sicily, you have to sail a little bit across right there.
Yeah.
That's
not very far.
Yeah, I mean, you just after you get there, it's just marching all the way up.
Sure. But you know, they're not just going to fight here. Once things start breaking out, once hostilities break out, remember the hostilities go on for over 20 years. It's a long war. So how did Rome acquire the boats she needed? How did she figure out how to do that?
I remember how they got the boats the second time.
How did they do it the second time?
The second time they were like, we're gonna lose some weird person and donate a bunch of money.
They donated tons of money. It's very good that you remember that. That's awesome. Can you imagine just like our army needs tanks and we all just donate money to the army for? It's very cool. Okay, I want to find the answer. Okay, a Carthaginian ship had been wrecked on the coast of Italy, and taking it for a model, the Romans, who up to this time had known but little of the sea, performed the extraordinary feat of building 120 warships in 60 days. They didn't even know how to build them. Like, oh, let's just copy theirs. Let's just copy theirs. Now, it's one thing to build a bunch of ships. It's another thing to know how to sail them, you know? And not just physically make them move through the water, but in a fighting situation, right? To maneuver, to swing around and then ram. We don't have time to learn that. We're at war. So here's what we'll do. We'll just equip our ships with a bridge, with a boom we can lower down. We'll get close to them. We'll run over on their ships. And we'll just whack them with our swords because we know how to do that. We're good at that. If we can just get on their ships, it's like fighting on land. Except the ship is moving.
And they can self-destruct the ship.
Well, they could, but it worked. It worked pretty well. It worked pretty well. They just started attacking ships like being boarded by pirates or something. You know, they just swing over in your ship, jump, come over on their little bridge. And then they just whack you because this is what the Roman army does best, yes.
Is it like, if it's a Carthaginian model of a ship, then did they think that it was a Carthaginian ship?
Yeah, like I said.
Oh, that I don't know. I'm pretty sure maybe the first time or two, but they pretty quick probably learned that is not a friendly. Really, that's a good question that I hadn't thought about. They could get away with that a couple of times, maybe. But this war goes on for, like I said, 20 some years. Actually, you know what we should do? Flip back to your timeline. Go back to the one that's on page 72 in your reading guide. And you should have a timeline that has 500 BC on the top, and I don't know, 1 BC on the bottom, I guess. And so what would be in the middle? 250. And so here's what I want you to write kind of close to the middle. 264 to 241, First Punic War. Probably up on the top of this timeline, you have things like the Battle of Marathon and the Peloponnesian War. So you can see this is a good 150, 200 years after. At this point, while you write that down, I will just tell you, at this point, Alexander the Great has been dead for 60, 70 years, and his empire is ruled by, the descendants of his generals. That's what's going on over in the east half while all this is going on.
But it's all split up, right?
Yeah, it is. No, yeah.
Was it good?
Yeah.
Was like so Alexander the Great, he built a great nation. So like it is a good
Well, it depends on what you mean by stay good. It didn't politically stay together because we had all these generals and Egypt breaks off and Macedonia breaks off. But you know what he did do that was a raving success was that Hellenistic culture and that spreading Greek culture throughout the East. It formed, well, so in my class that I'm taking, we had to read a history of education in antiquity, and it was very interesting because they were talking about that basically what we think of as classical education springs from the Hellenistic schools of Alexander and post-Alexander. So that is something that really stuck, but politically not so much. That's a good question.
like no time, like not even.
No. There was no one Alexander's empire at all after he died. It immediately broke up into, some of the bits were pretty big, but it immediately broke up. So the Carthaginians weren't all paid mercenaries. They did have their own generals, and one of them was a guy named Hamilcar. Hamilcar had the nickname of Barca, thunder, it meant thunder or lightning. Man of lightning. That's a good nickname. Man of lightning. Hamilcar Barca was fighting in North Africa, and the Roman consul Regulus just brought an army over and started rampaging, had some amazing victories in Africa, and then his army got surrounded, and a bunch of them got killed, and the rest of them got captured. Remember, this is one of the two consuls with half the Roman army. It's pretty big. And so the Carthaginians and Hamilcar say, Regulus, we will send you back to make peace terms. Here's what we're offering. If it doesn't work out, you have to promise to come back. I promise. This is the last question I asked you. What did Regulus do to behave honorably? What did he do? To certain death, I might add. He knew they were going to kill him. Yeah, he went back to Rome. You told it very well. He went back to Rome and he said, these terms stink. Don't take it. This is a bad treaty. It's a bad peace. He said, well, Regulus, you don't actually have to go back. His family pleads with him, you don't have to go back. I promised. The enemy in wartime, doesn't matter, I promised. He went back. The story is that they killed him, they tortured him to death by not letting him sleep. Did you know that if you don't sleep for long enough, you die? Don't panic. If you can't fall asleep tonight, you have a little insomnia, you're not going to die. But it has to be many, 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 many days. But eventually, your body shuts down if it has zero sleep, and it will kill you. And I think it involved, I'm like, I should tell them, and I'm looking at their little eager faces. We want to know how they tortured him. I think they had, you make someone stand up and then there's spikes. You can't lean because it's hard. You end up leaning if you fall asleep. Do you know what I mean? And if they make it so you can't lie down, you can't move, and if you lean over, it will poke. And he just didn't sleep because it would wake him up, obviously, every time he leaned. That is the story. I don't know that's what they say. One of those, this is what they say happened to Regulus. We do know they put him to death, but that's the method is rumored to have been not letting him sleep. It is terrible. He kept his promise. And eventually, things started looking up again for Rome. Yes. You mean the left-handed guy?
Yeah.
Oh, Mucius Scaevola.
Yeah. I feel like they should have done something. It's like, do you think honestly when they were like, yeah, see you later, you go check with your people and then you come back and they don't agree, you know you're gonna die. I feel like they should have noticed,
Oh, maybe they shouldn't have put him to death because he was so very honorable. That would have been very nice. And like you said, that is something other enemies did. It's something the Romans did to their adversaries. Did we talk about the schoolmaster of Falerii? Once when they were attacking a neighboring town, Falerii, it's very, very close. There was a teacher, and he had all the leading boys of the city as his pupils. And it was wartime. Rome was attacking Falerii, but they were kids. And so the teacher would go out from the city walls every day. I don't know, like on a nature walkers. We're doing our nature notebooks, whatever. And he would wander out every day, and he'd wander a little farther from the city every day with these kids. Finally, one day, he just leads them straight to the Roman camp. And he says, boom, I have brought you all the sons of the leading men of Falerii. You can use them as bargaining chips, and you've won. And he thought that he was going to get a reward. And the general in charge thought he was disgusting. He said, no, we don't use kids as bargaining chips. We don't need to. We're good at what we do. And you're a dirty, rotten traitor. And they stripped him down to the waist and gave the kids whips or something. And they had them whip their teacher back into Falerii. I love it. It's hilarious. That's what they thought of people who don't keep their word. Do you know what? Traitors, that sort of ilk. So that would have been nice. That would have been a nice ending to the story, Rhett. Oh, Regulus, you are so honorable. We will not torture you to death. But that is not the way the story ended. So things started looking up. Matthew told us that the people, even though they'd lost most of their fleet, they donated money to rebuild. And Carthage lost. Carthage was forced to restore all Roman prisoners without any ransom and to pay Rome a large sum of money. But most important of all, she had to give up Sicily. And for the first time, Rome ruled territory beyond the mainland. This is step one to empire. We now run something that's not physically attached to Italy. And we are just going to keep expanding. We're going to run with that over the next several hundred years. However, the story is not over because Carthage is not just going to sit there and take it. They are going to want to do something about it. And largely because Hamilcar Barca, who did not die during the war, after the war ended, he went to Spain. Carthage had a bunch of colonies in Spain. And he had a son with him. I'm not going to tell you, some of you know, just keep it to yourself, the name of his son and why he is significant. But he is a large reason why the story does not end there. You're going to read about that next time. Finish chapter whatever, 9. And I also want to warn you, it's 36 pages in the Dorothy Mills book. And there's pictures and stuff. It's not a crazy amount. But usually I give you somewhere between 10 and 20. And I just wanted to warn you, there was just no other place to break it up. The Second Punic War, there's tons of stuff that happens. It's very exciting, lots of incidents. And so but be forewarned, if you're accustomed to just sit down in, 20 minutes and it's so creepy in here. It's weird. But the banging noise was it sounded like ghosts and it was very weird. I'm very distracted today. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, I can't even finish that thought. Finish chapter 9. I was going to say, if you're accustomed to just sit down on Tuesday afternoon and 20 minutes and read Dorothy Mills, you might want a little more time than that. So make sure to allot that. So there are 2 things so far. Are you going to add an introduction and a conclusion to the paper that you've already written the body of? And you are going to finish chapter 9 and finish out the conflict between Rome and Carthage that's going to set the stage for who is going to be in charge in the Mediterranean. And you already know who that is. You know what the end is. Yes.
Is there anything like you know of what happened?
We do not know even if Dido was a real person. Except that in the Aeneid, Aeneas, was your retelling talk about this? I think I mentioned it. They run into each other in the underworld. Did I tell you about that? So you remember that Aeneas, in your version, it was very abbreviated. He goes to the underworld and he sees his dad, and his dad shows him all the people that are going to be future Romans. Well, when he first gets there, though, he runs into Dido. And he says, okay, this is the Mrs. Ferguson paraphrase. It's not been close. Oh, Dido, I'm so sorry. I thought something bad happened to you. I saw the fire and everything. And really? Was it that rough for me to leave? Did you love me that much? And in the poem, it just says, she just looks away. She won't talk to him. Like the equivalent of, this is what she does. She's like, and she goes off with Sychaeus, her dead husband. And she's like, come on, Sychaeus, I don't know who that is. And she just gives him the cold shoulder. I'm sorry, that's not really what you're asking, Rhett. But that's all we know about Dido. No, he was actually much more sorrowful there than he was when he, was going to sneak off. Okay, before we move on for the temple, if you are going to rule all of Italy and now Sicily and someday the world, you need roads. You need good roads. And that's mean. Okay, listen. We're going to bring it down a notch. The ancients used to say that all roads lead to Rome. The Romans needed many roads to bring their soldiers home. They marched away to conquer. They dealt in foreign trade. They traveled on vacation. They strutted on parade. To all their distant provinces, those roads ran long and straight. They made the Roman Empire glorious and great. Owen.
Oh, there's some people digging up the foundation of the canals in like Italy or somewhere, and when they dig up the foundation of the canals, they found an ancient Roman road.
Oh, a Roman room? Oh, Roman road.
And so they put like glass doors on top of it. So they go to that.
I don't even like McDonald's, but I would go to that one. If anybody. That is very cool. Do you know there are Roman roads that still exist? The Romans did an amazing job. I read a statistic somewhere that eventually there was a network of 10,000 miles of road networked throughout the empire. Because, if you're going to rule the world, you got to send their soldiers, you got to send supplies, you got to get messages and information back and forth. And they made, they dig a ditch and they'd fill with varying sizes of gravel, from pea gravel to bigger, and then finally flat paving stones. I mean, they were paved roads, for crying out loud. They were really very, very good. And it seems like a minor thing, but think about how frustrating it is for us when the roads are getting worked on. Do you know, when the roads aren't working properly, how inconvenient life is? It slows everything down, right? And so they had top-notch roads. And so, no, they couldn't, send emails or phone calls to get information back and forth, but they could move information and troops pretty doggone fast because of those amazing roads. Yeah, go ahead.
Didn't you say that they were like safe too?
Yeah, under the early empire, under Augustus, this time is known as the Roman peace, and there just wasn't, I don't know, everything I can think of to call them sounds old-fashioned, highwaymen and brigandage. So like robbers, muggers on the roads. That it was safe to travel from one end of the empire to the other. Which brings me to the book that you started reading, For the Temple. Unfortunately, like I said, the only way to fit it in was to put it in the wrong historical place. So I'm asking you to shift in your mind from 264 BC all the way up to the 60s AD. And at the time of For the Temple, Jesus has already died and ascended and gone back to heaven. Peter and Paul have probably been killed in Rome for Jesus. That's the time period that we're talking about. So the Roman Empire, not the Republic anymore, it's an empire. And when we get to that part in Dorothy Mills, I'll say this is like what was happening in For the Temple, but we're kind of getting it out of sync. Yes, Owen.
Can I be honest? The beginning of the books.
Okay. I used to read all these books to my kids, and he's great, but it can be a little dry. It can be a little dry. It's too late for you guys, but I'm thinking of bumping this book when I teach this class again 2 years from now and substituting out something else. It's fine to say. G.A. Henty does a lot of research. And so what he says in his books is pretty historically accurate. Generally, just like in the Cat of Bubastes, the main character is made up, but the events and the other characters aren't. Which brings me to one of the main people that he met. Yeah, I'll do it this order. One of the main people he met is Josephus, the local governor. Josephus, everything in this book that you read about Josephus is true, except for his relationship with John, because John is a made-up character, right? Does that make sense? So the siege, everything you read about and everything you're going to hear about him is accurate. We know this because Josephus, this ruins it a little bit, because I think you left and they were holed up in Jotapata, and it was under siege. Telling you that he goes on to write a bunch of books about what happened probably tips my hand that he's going to get out somehow and he's not going to get killed there. But he did. He went on to write 2 major books. One was the history of the Jews. He was Jew. And the Romans didn't really read. They didn't have copies of the Old Testament. They didn't know all the stories that we know about the history of Israel. So he wrote a book that was sort of the history of Israel for Roman audiences, but also includes things that are after the books that we include in the Old Testament. The Maccabees, which is Catholic and Orthodox Bibles have that in the Old Testament, and Protestant Bibles don't. But it's a story of a revolt in the 200s against the Hellenistic governor at the time, and follows their history all the way down to Herod the Great, all the way down to Jesus, okay? Then he wrote another book that was the story of this. It is the story of the Romans cracking down on the Jews who are on the edge of rebellion and full-out rebellion. I'm gonna read something out of here in a minute, but let's talk about this. Why, we know from the New Testament that the Jews didn't like the Romans. You probably got that vibe, probably talked about it. Why did the Jews hate the Romans so much?
Ungodly, like sacrilege, to basically be in their city and control their city because, Jerusalem was the holy land. And their presence was disgraceful because they were heathen and it seemed unfair to the Israelites.
Okay, and how is that different from them desecrating everyone else's lands that they conquered, do you think?
Because they know that they're not
They're God's chosen people. All the people that Rome conquered, they've just got stupid nothing gods that aren't real. We don't. And you're coming here, trampling around. We don't even deal with non-Jewish people in general. Go ahead, Rhett, what were you going to say?
And like they felt suppressed. Like they hated it. Like that's why they killed Jesus, is that they thought that they were going to live with the Romans because they hated the Romans so much and they've been oppressing their people and their families for decades.
But again, they were oppressing everybody in the entire empire in that respect. But the Jews took it differently, right? Because they had, from the Roman perspective, some odd habits. The whole worship one God thing, don't understand that. This temple, people all over the empire have all sorts of temples, all sorts of gods, but there's something, they have really strict rules about this particular temple. In fact, there's an area beyond which women can't go. Then there's an area, beyond which Gentiles, anybody who's not a Jew, can't go. And they really, really, more than all the other people that Rome ruled, felt like this was just an insult. Now, it did not help that sometimes Rome tried to do really stupid stuff. There is an emperor, he's famous for being kind of whacked, not all there. We know him as Caligula. See, that worries me about you. Anyway, Josephus, listen to what Josephus tells us about him. Gaius, that's Caligula, dispatched Petronius as legate of Syria and ordered him to lead an army into Judea and set up a statue of Gaius inside the temple of God. Okay, I think we all know how they're going to react to that. Do you know, if I am a good God-fearing Jew, I will fight till I die before I see something like that happen in my temple. And isn't that the attitude we start to meet as you go through the book? You're going to see it more and more. I will fight till I die before I let something happen to the temple. Yeah, Jerusalem too, to some extent, with the temple. It's where God meets us, the God that made the universe. Later, I don't know where it is in Josephus, later there's another riot there because one of the governors brought in Roman standards, the legionary standards that had little idols, little statues. They didn't even let them bring them into Jerusalem. They had a riot in the streets when the Roman governor brought the standards in. This was the attitude. The Romans tax them. The Romans tax everybody. Well, I don't even know if they taxed them more. But because they hated the Gentiles so much, because you got to remember, and we know this from the New Testament, they really thought God was just for them. This was hard for them when Christianity opened up access to God to people who weren't Jews. It blew their minds. But the practice of the Romans, and this hit the Jews particularly hard because of the way they felt about non-Jewish people. If I am the Roman governor and I need to tax you, I don't do it. Dalton pays me money, and he is now the tax collector. Congratulations, Dalton. You're the tax collector. Maybe Dalton is Jewish, but now you all hate him. You dirty, rotten traitor. You're taking money from the Romans. Then, I'm sorry, Dalton, to inform you that I'm not going to pay you anything for being the tax collector. So what you're going to have to do is just when you tax all these guys, just take extra. Just take however much extra you want and put the rest in your own pocket. This is tax collector. This is Zacchaeus, who says, I am repenting. He didn't say those words, but he said, if I have defrauded anyone, I will give it back fourfold. Oh, you have defrauded, Zacchaeus. Your profession is defrauding. Everything you have is extra taxes that people didn't owe that you took. Matthew was a tax collector. Jesus invited a tax collector to be one of the 12. The reaction was, oh my goodness, he can't be anything good if he would hang out with a tax collector. That's why it always says in the New Testament, tax collectors and sinners. He hangs out with tax collectors and sinners. But everyone knew the Romans were behind the whole system. So we hate the Romans. So yeah, go ahead, Rhett. No,
Have you seen the Chosen?
I have not.
Oh, it is so good.
I'm hearing very good things about it. How do you see this? Is it on a streaming service?
Yeah,
It's on Studios.
yeah, you can just get the actual Studios.
Okay. Okay.
They just finished the third season.
I have other students that tell me about this, that it's really awesome.
It gives.
Does it talk about the animosity? Does it show that? Okay. So,
like, you think about it, so like, you hear about Jesus, Peter, Matthew a little bit, but then everybody else is kind of the same. Like, they have things that they do, and they have their backgrounds, but like, you hear about Peter, Jesus, and John.
mhm.
That's it.
But they're kind of the
Yeah.
big ones. I could say it like that. They're the major
You
players.
just don't hear about any of them. Like, they're not written about as much. But
Yeah.
the Chosen gives a personality, and they give highlights to every single one, like as if every single one of them had their own book in the Bible.
That's very cool.
It's really.
Oh, well, maybe I'll have to check that out.
It just shows like so like and like if you've seen any other like Jesus films or anything, Jesus is just like this like plain like
Mm-hmm.
God, like what you imagine like a God as, like not bad, just very just. But it shows that he's like humorous. He makes jokes. He'll like tease people about things. Not like mean, but like
Yeah. No, I understand.
He plays games and interacts with kids and like it's really good.
This is an aside. I'm sorry, but I like what you're saying because it was a movie. It was a major motion picture in theaters, and I can't remember the name of it. No, it wasn't that. It was, and it included the resurrection, and anyway. But so I'll have to look it up. There was a scene, and he was by the Sea of Galilee, which is where John lives. The time when he was on the shore cooking fish, and the disciples were in the boat, and they weren't sure. And it says they all knew it was the Lord. No one dared ask. But it was still that weird post-resurrection time when apparently he didn't look exactly like himself all the time. He was not always recognized. Anyway, there was a scene in this movie where they're sitting there eating the fish, and there's a hut, a hovel, off with the shore, and there's yelling. You hear yelling, and some lady's screaming, she's throwing stuff, and this man is running away. She's throwing this guy out. And he comes, and he's covered, he's a leper. And I just remember that camera went to Jesus's face, and he looked at the leper, and he got this mischievous grin on his face, like, I know what I'm going to do. And this story is not in the Bible. This is completely added, but it fit the character. And he went over and healed this guy. But the smile, the like, yeah, this is going to be good. I love doing this. And that was a very human, and that sort of mirth, that glee, that I'm bringing life. This is so awesome. Okay. Well, let me, because we have just a few minutes. John lives in the Sea of Galilee, around the sea. He doesn't live in the Sea of Galilee. It'd be very unpleasant. He lives next to the Sea of Galilee, up here, and Jerusalem is down here. But Israel is not even nearly as long as Illinois. You know, this is not, it's not a very far distance. And so when they keep, in the first part that you read, they keep crossing the lake. Tarakia, the governor's place, they don't actually know where that is. It's described, but there's no remain. They haven't identified this was the city of Tarakia. The Romans did their job well of completely obliterating certain cities. But they live around here, and you notice there are all sorts of factions, right? There's groups of people who want to rebel against the Romans. Various groups, and they don't all get along with each other. The reason is, first of all, if that table is a robber band, you're a rebel band fighting the Romans. And this table is another rebel band fighting the Romans. Unfortunately, if you join together, you could be stronger, but you like to loot and pillage because you got to eat. And you also like to loot and pillage your own people. And you don't like it when they loot the places you want to loot and vice versa. Do you see? So now we're arguing with each other. And this is why John keeps saying, oh my goodness, if everybody would just band together and stop arguing with each other, we might have a chance. But this is a mess. Josephus, on the other hand, wants to calm everything down. Josephus is a Jew, but he's been made governor by the Romans, and he knows this is not going to go well. He doesn't like the things the Romans are doing, but the Romans are very, very strong. And so when you left off in your reading at the end of chapter 5, they were holed up in the city. Josephus tells us the story because remember, he's there. It says, let me skip that part. The next day the attack began. Vespasian ordered his archers and slingers to shoot while he himself led the infantry up a slope that led to the least defensible part of the wall. Josephus rushed there with the entire garrison and drove the Romans from the ramparts. Great feats of daring were performed by both sides until night parted the combatants. Then he describes how the city is surrounded by deep ravines on 3 sides, accessible only from the north. But then the Romans bring in their machines. The Roman mounted ballista. A Roman ballista shot stones up to 160 pounds. That's going to hurt. Vespasian now brought out his artillery engines, 160 in all of them. 160 of them.
160 times 160.
Aimed them at those who defended the battlements. The catapults shot a huge volley of lances, and the stone projectors hurled great blocks of enormous weight. There was also a hail of firebrands and arrows, all of which soon cleared the battlements of the enemy. Here's a picture of the battering ram. You guys have always seen battering rams. You know, the Romans, you know, I can't just walk up to the wall because the people on the wall are going to shoot me. So I get my shield, you know, and my neighbor gets his shield, and we all build a little shield hut. And it's I'm doing this live on YouTube. It's called a testudo. It means a turtle. They turn themselves into a human turtle, right? And they creep up so that they can bring the battering ram up, or they can start digging under the walls and make the walls fall down. They're very good at this. And so, unfortunately, you left in the middle of the siege of your reading, but I've kind of insinuated that it's not going to go well for them. Please read chapters 6 through 10 for next week. I just wanted to throw out one more thing. You can go ahead and start packing up your stuff. The rabbi, the guy that comes to John's house and tells them about the situation, has mentioned that people are all going to Jerusalem. John is going to start talking about going to Jerusalem to defend the temple, ergo the name of the book for the temple. But Jesus had warned his followers, don't do it. Once he came into Jerusalem And his followers, his disciples said, look at all these amazing buildings, Master. And he said, I tell you the truth, not one stone will be left on another. And you pray, and he said, there will be trouble as has never been since the beginning of the world. Pray that it doesn't come in the winter or on the Sabbath. It will be terrible for pregnant women and nursing women in those days. When you see the armies surround Jerusalem, flee to the hills. He said that. It's in the Gospels. It's in one of the Gospels. If you ask me, like I've got a Bible on my phone, or send me an email and say, tell me where that is. And you know what? When the Romans started to surround Jerusalem, the Christians left. Jesus said this was going to happen. When the armies surround Jerusalem, flee to the hills. And they're going to mention this in the book, in For the Temple. Anyway, and it's a good thing they did, because when you hear what's going to happen later in the book, as bad since the beginning of the world, yeah, it might be a good description of what happens to Jerusalem. What? Everybody should have fled? Yes. And did you notice that John also doesn't agree with Josephus's plan of attack? Let's hole up in cities. The Romans are good at attacking cities. If we go to the hills and like guerrilla warfare and we come down and burn their stuff and attack them, we might stand a chance. But if we hole up in a city, and also what happens when you're holed up in a city? You run out of food, you run out of water. It's bad. Okay, so go ahead and read chapter 6 through 10, finish chapter 9 of Dorothy Mills, add to your paper, and I will see you next week. Thank you.